Okay, let's move on to issue topic number 5, and it's a sort of a look back at, as I say, as was mentioned earlier, the local elections of last week, and not just the local elections, the elections in Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland as well, but also, in terms of the mayoral elections. And one of the things that you can conclude from it is that there's absolutely no doubt that the current leader of the Labour Party is not fit for purpose. Because what we've noticed, and then you've noticed it too, and many other people have been talking about it, is that those that actually stood for something in terms of locality, in terms of a set of values and principles, did so much better in the election than those who were airy-fairy, driven by Westminster, chosen candidates who had little to do with the location in which they were standing. The Hartlepool, obviously, classic one. It just gives the impression that the Labour Party now aren't really that much different to the Conservative Party, which means that when you come to choose the two brands on the shelf, if you're already buying one brand, there's no incentive to buy a brand that tastes virtually the same. The only reason you switch from buying one brand to another brand is because you don't particularly like the brand you're currently consuming, or you've gone off it for various reasons. Your taste buds have changed or whatever, or the price has been elevated to a point where you can't afford it anymore or whatever. So what you're being offered with Keir Starmer's Labour, from what I perceive, is why would the consumer change? Because what are they changing to? Because the new brand of coffee is almost like it's got no label on. You don't know what you're getting. You just know it looks brown, and same as the other coffee that you consume. But that's all it is. They had no policies outwardly. They were doing these gimmicky, photo opportunities, stood in a wallpaper shop. Keir Starmer, you've got a shadow cabinet that virtually nobody knows who is in it because they're just bland. So from the point of view of looking back at last week's results and trying to ascertain where the Labour Party go from here, it's a radical overhaul as far as I can see. And I didn't vote Labour, but it's a radical overhaul that they require.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I was just thinking of a slight analogy with what you were saying there, that, if we say that the Conservative government is offering Marmite, or is Marmite, love it or hate it, I guess, under Corbyn, Labour were offering jam, homemade jam, made by Corbyn from fruits grown on his allotment, but something completely different. And now, Corbyn and jam have been shunted to one side, and Keir Starmer's offering Vegemite, a slightly different version of Marmite, essentially. That's not great at all. It's not offering the voters' choice. And of course, we're talking about a time when we desperately need a viable alternative to a Conservative government that's rampantly corrupt and have dealt with the pandemic, obviously, atrociously, with one of the worst death tolls in the world, one of the worst death rates in the world, and the slowest economic recovery from the pandemic of all the G7 countries, and also trying to, as we discussed earlier, doing things to destroy our democracy even further. So we desperately, and the growing inequalities, growing number of people living in poverty, children in poverty, continued cuts to services and austerity. So we desperately need a viable alternative, and Starmer isn't offering one currently. I posed the question last week before the election: what is he offering and to whom? And it's really not clear. There's not a clear, consistent message that is different from the Conservatives. He's lurched the Labour Party to the right, and as you say, all over the country, it was mostly left-wing, socialist Labour candidates that were successful. They got elected or re-elected. Same in Wales, of course, where the Welsh leader and Welsh Labour Party is more left wing than it is in.
Well, Mark Drakeford,
Yeah.
even he admitted himself he did much better than he was expecting, given the current climate.
Yeah.
You know, and Wales now has become a safe place for Labour voters.
Yeah.
Even though the Conservatives, I think, got 13 seats. You know, Mark Drakeford's Labour way out in front of everybody else. So if you've got those sort of more egalitarian, equitable values, at the moment it seems to me that if you are prepared to move, then Wales is the place to go to.
Yeah, absolutely. And conversely, all over the country, the more centrist or right wing candidates of the Labour Party lost seats or weren't elected or re-elected, and that includes people where Starmer's been doing this awful thing where constituency Labour parties have elected a candidate, and he's overruled them, thrown out that candidate, and parachuted his own centrist person in there,
Yes.
who've then failed dismally.
I don't know if you've also
elected. And despite
I don't know if you've also noticed, Tom. Sorry, just to butt you in there. I don't know if you've also noticed that what governments tend to do is they tend to blame the opposition party. So, for example, the Conservatives are still, where they can, they're still blaming Labour for the fact that they haven't been in office since 2010. They're still blaming Labour in 2021. What the Labour Party are doing, they're not blaming the Conservatives, they're blaming the previous Labour leader for everything. Even though he got more votes than any other Labour leader this century, apart from Tony Blair in 2001. It looks like a conspiracy within the Labour Party. For a lot of people on the outside, it looks like this isn't a case of incompetence. This is a case of a proper, full-blown conspiracy to shift Labour back to the right.
Yeah. Oh, it is. Yeah, undoubtedly, and obviously, Starmer's response to to this very clear message that left-wing Labour candidates in the main did well and right-wing Labour candidates in the main did badly. His response is to say, we're still suffering with the left-wing era of Corbyn, and we need to move yet further to the right. There's always been this argument for many, many years now that Labour has to shift to the right to get elected. Otherwise, it'll perpetually be a party of opposition.
Yeah.
And it has indeed spent a large amount of its existence in opposition, far more than in government, in power. And it's almost an accepted view that Labour has to shift to the right because Tony Blair did, and because he courted Murdoch, and the Sun supported him, and they got elected. I don't think now the facts prove that to be true. Certainly in these local elections, the facts prove otherwise, as we just discussed. So there's a considerable chance that, far from making Labour more electable by shifting them to the right, Starmer's actually alienating traditional left-wing Labour voters, that meaning they'll vote for someone else or just apathetically not show up at the polling station. And he may be making, sending Labour into political oblivion.
Well, two things come from that for me. Firstly, the rise of the Green Party candidates. They got so many more candidates in last week's elections because for those people on the left, they're looking around to see who they can vote for now, apart from the right-wing Keir Starmer Labour Party, and they've gone for Green. And of course, the other thing as well, the point you made about the local elections being sort of symbolic of voters not wanting right-wing Labour candidates. But if you look at the 2017 election under first past the post, Jeremy Corbyn only missed out on becoming Prime Minister by literally hundreds of votes, because the constituencies polling or voting showed that many candidates were so close together that if 10 this way and 20 that way or whatever would have given him the opportunity to form the government. So that was people call it a radical manifesto. It's no more radical than most Scandinavian countries get every election. It's just that the way in which it was painted by the right-wing billionaire corporate media and right-wing voices was to suggest that it was this Stalinist, Leninist project. nothing of the sort. That's a drivel. But of course, if you're constantly fed drivel, you only know what you know.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, you're right. It goes back to the Overton window that we talked about earlier. The Overton window's shifted again and again and again to the right, so that now actually very reasonable populist or popular policies that were in the Labour manifesto. And objectively, when people were shown those policies without knowing which party they were from, Labour's manifesto was massively more popular than any of the other main parties. But you know, we're told repeatedly that that they were, you know, crazy, loony left, socialist, verging on communist policies. But as you say, that those policies that were presented in the Labour manifesto, as well as being objectively popular in this country, are seen as very, very normal countries, policies in so many countries, including European countries, Scandinavian countries. Of course, New Zealand's doing exceptionally well with their Labour leader, Jacinda Ardern, not only with the pandemic, where they've had 26 deaths, we've had verging on 150,000, but a lot of other issues as well. They're doing very well with economically and otherwise. So yeah, it's a desperate situation. I don't know what the future is for Labour, but I believe under Starmer it'll continue to be pushed further to the right. Traditional Labour voters and people that are active within the Labour Party have been persecuted and attacked. Large numbers of people have been ejected, had their memberships, cancelled from the Labour Party, including black and ethnic minority people and Jewish people, because they're socialists. And some of that is unforgivable for us on the left, for people like myself on the left. It's pretty unforgivable what Starmer's done. And of course, the other thing is this extraordinary revelation that a considerable number of people within the Labour Party at Labour Central Office, when Corbyn was leader, were actively working to undermine the Labour Party and prevent them from winning the elections in 2017, 2019.
Well, we've got on
and the Ford report, can I just say, the Ford report, which explores that, we've all been waiting for Labour to publish that Ford report for well over a year. And I think Starmer's decided to bury it because he doesn't want the general public to know that essentially his mates, the Blairites, the right wing of the Labour Party, were actively working to undermine their chances of winning elections under Corbyn.
But and I was about to say as well that we've got a 6-part unredacted analysis that was leaked last May, so a year ago, of who's responsible, what was going on, etc. It's absolutely certain that the Ford report, even when it does come out, will be redacted. And for some major event we know will occur within 24 hours to shift everybody's attention away, because that's how it works in the billionaire corporate media. So, please, viewers, if you really want to know what went on, go to Dorset Eye and look at the leak report analysis over 6 articles. It's horrifying. It's terrifying. It's terrifying that a Labour Party that was supposed in its genesis to represent the working classes and to help level up more, bring up those people in terms of opportunities, income, etc. It makes horrible reading.